We continue coverage of our breaking news this morning. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock. I'm Doug Embledge.
I'm Norma Holland.
And if you are just waking up, if it is your routine to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and turn on the TV, perhaps you have not heard that there was a plane crash near Buffalo last night. It was a Continental Airlines flight operated by Colgan Air. It crashed about 10 miles short of the Buffalo Airport in Clarence Center, New York.
49 people in all were killed, and you can see the impact site there. We've got a map up there of what happened. 49 people were killed. 44 passengers on board that Continental Express plane, 4 crew members, 1 person on the ground was killed when that plane nosedived into a home in Clarence Center.
We show you this picture because it kind of gives you a sense of Clarence Center. It is a village situation. You can see some open ground not far from the more densely packed homes. It crashed into a house on Long Street in Clarence Center, New York. Clarence, if you're driving the thruway to Buffalo, it's essentially on the right-hand side before you get to maybe exit 49 where you would get off of the Buffalo Airport. So it's right there, a very well-known suburb of Buffalo. So we have 2 crews on the scene, Sean Carroll and Evan Dawson. Evan, let's check in with you and find out what you've found out. I know this is the moment that we are expecting investigators from the NTSB to arrive on the scene.
Yeah, right now NTSB getting to the scene, but they also understand, Doug and Norma, that it is going to be some time before they can begin the real work of trying to find out what happened. Now, obviously, we can start with what was told to air traffic, which is frankly not much. The real shock that investigators have right now is there was almost no communication indicating trouble. The plane simply dropped out of radar and was gone. So a lot of people were asking about the weather conditions here. We're told at the time of the crash, which was about 10:20 last night, 32 degrees, some fog, nothing too heavy, some snow, nothing too heavy, and about 17-mile-an-hour winds, described by one of the firefighters as rather standard winter conditions. They do not view this as the conditions, anything abnormal. For this part of the country. They handle it like this quite often. And so now investigators will have to wait till the hotness just can cool down and firefighters can really get it under control. They have blocked off that neighborhood, a couple block radius, to make sure that people are not coming in and cluttering up the investigation. And they're trying to get that fire still under control to the point where investigators can go through it. What do they expect to learn? Well, let's hear now from a firefighter who talks about the angle of descent. It was a very steep angle of descent, and part of the investigation will help them learn not only from witnesses, but also the debris path. Here's what he said.
I think the investigation will show a lot more insight as to the approach and the distribution of debris. The infrastructure, that one house was completely destroyed. There was some superficial damage to the houses around. That will suggest certainly a very particular type of accident, I'm sure.
And so we're going to hear more probably later this weekend. They think it could be 24 to 48 hours. And in fact, the county executive here says they're viewing this in almost 72-hour blocks now, in which they're going to be not only moving their command center, but trying to move ahead in this investigation. One more note on the investigation today. NTSB is involved. FBI is also here. And anytime there is a crash or any sort of distress with an airliner, it is natural for people to wonder what happened. By all accounts, and at least by intuition or the view of the evidence so far, this looks like a catastrophic accident. The FBI did say that they will investigate all means and everything else that comes up to make sure that there wasn't anything astray here, but no signs of that. So far, it looks like just a catastrophic air accident. Doug and Norma.
All right, Evan, thanks for bringing us up to date.
It crashed around 10:20 last night on a flight from Newark to Buffalo, and we are waiting for the manifest to be released that will tell us who was on that plane. We know a couple names already. We'll get into that in just a few minutes.
Right now, we're going to turn to Sean Carroll. He's standing by. He's been covering this all night for us. And Sean, you mentioned earlier the heat from that scene. There was thousands of pounds of fuel on that plane that still needs to burn out, right?
Yeah, some of the lasting images are a lot of firefighters standing by these red-hot flames, not able to do anything, letting it just burn out, because clearly just putting water on that was just not going to help, not going to be helpful for their resources. I heard Doug there mention, and we're going to probably find out more when this manifest is released, and more over the coming hours and days on who was on that plane. Officials are saying many of them are from Western New York, specifically the Buffalo and surrounding area. This was a very routine flight from Newark to Buffalo that ended just about 5 minutes short in a catastrophic way, as Evan alluded to. A lot of stories coming out of this, and for right now, in the overnight hours into the early morning hours as we've been out here, a lot of those stories are coming from those neighbors that heard this, that saw this, that rushed to the scene. We have some video of one woman who was actually, when we found her, outside hosing down her home. Embers were flying from the fire scene nearby. She had her garden hose ready, and she didn't know what had happened at first, just like many other neighbors.
I thought a plow with its blade down had struck a transformer pole. That's kind of what it sounded like. And then I thought, no, that couldn't have been it. It must have been an earthquake.
And it certainly sounded like that for many neighbors. We've had other witness accounts say they heard a sputtering, perhaps an engine, almost sounded like a small prop plane flying low or over some of their homes, which leads many to believe that this may have been a mechanical, that's speculation at this point, but may have been mechanical in nature. That woman there saying she looked outside once she, got some clothes on and rushed outside, saw flames 3 houses high. She was only a few doors away herself. Obviously, some lasting images and stories that we'll be hearing a lot of in the coming hours and days.
All right, thank you so much, Sean. The folks that were waiting at the Buffalo airport, our hearts, you think about that scene. They have been taken to the Cheektowaga Senior Center, not too far from the Buffalo airport, and there they will certainly be gathered with counselors, with people from Continental Airlines as well, and just wait for more information. This, by the way, was the first crash of a scheduled airliner in which people died since August of 2006, when that plane went down in Lexington, Kentucky, when there was the issue of the wrong runway. Remember coverage of that? And of course, just a couple of weeks ago, there was the splash landing, the miraculous splash landing of a U.S. Airways flight into the Hudson River. No one died in that.
Yeah, I know. That's the unfortunate thing, is we, of course, the airline industry is celebrating that good news, of course, on the Hudson, and now having to deal with this just tragic investigation. We do have part of the flight transmission between the Continental Airlines flight and the air traffic control tower. There was some audio from that radio message. Apparently nothing indicating that there was a problem, at least with the pilot of the plane.
The recording you're about to hear, if it's the same one we've been playing since about 4:30 this morning, it is. It is after the plane has crashed. What we are hearing is that there was no indication, as Norma said, from the pilot that there was anything wrong. She was calm, cool, and collected. It seemed like a routine approach to the Buffalo airport, and then all of a sudden, that flight disappeared from the radar screen, and here you hear the conversation from the control.
Atlanta, there's some ground communication. You need to talk to somebody at least 5 miles northeast, okay, possibly Clarence, that area right in there, Akron area, either state police or sheriff's department need to find out if anything is on the ground. This aircraft was 5 miles out, and all of a sudden we have no response to that aircraft. All I can tell you is the aircraft over the marker, and we're not talking to them now.
If you're an air traffic controller, you understand what's going on there. They stack up the planes and they watch them come in, and they keep in constant contact with them. And that, I assume, would be the worst nightmare of an air traffic controller, to have a plane just disappear from your screen because you have a sense of responsibility. It's my job to get that plane into this airport safely, and all of a sudden, for no reason whatsoever that you can explain at the moment, it is gone.
If you're just joining us this morning, we want to bring you up to date and recap for you what is happening. We are following the story of a Continental Express plane that number 3407 went down in Clarence Center last night around 10:20. It crashed, landed into a home, nosedived into a home there. 49 people in all were killed, 44 passengers, 4 crew members, 1 person on the ground. That plane crashed about 10 miles from the Buffalo airport. And we're learning more about some of the names of the people on board. However, an official list of names of the victims has not yet been released. We're told family members or people who perhaps were awaiting someone on that plane. There's a number for you to call this morning, 1-800-621-3263. If you're looking for more information, and we've learned about just a couple of those people on the plane.
We know nothing of any Rochester folks on that plane. It is certainly possible the Buffalo airport is the second choice for a number of Rochester flyers. So as soon as we learn something, we'll pass it along to you. More about the plane and more about what we know about the people on board coming up next. Stay with us. But we want to get back to our breaking news now and tell you what's happening. If you're just getting up this morning, 49 people died in a plane crash near Buffalo last night in Clarence Center. It was a Continental Connection flight 3407 operated by Colgan Air. 48 people on the plane died and one person on the ground was killed when that plane went down around 10:20 last night. They still don't know what caused the crash.
And we're still finding out who was on board that plane, who the victims are in this tragedy. We of course, many family members were already at the airport ready to greet their loved ones when they got off the plane. We heard from one brother who found out some terrible news about his sister.
My sister was on the plane, as far as we know.
She was due to come in on that flight?
Yes. My other sister, Laura, was waiting at the airport. I heard on the radio that there had been a crash, so I called immediately to see if the plane had landed at the airport or not. And initially she thought that it had, but it turns out that that is not the case.
I hear so many of these horrible stories, and I know you mentioned that young man had to call his parents in Florida to tell them what had happened.
They were vacationing down there, and now they're going to have to make the flight back to Buffalo knowing what they know this morning. His sister was coming in from Jacksonville, we're told, where she's a student at a law school there. Holly Maynard is at the computer in the 13WHAM newsroom now. Hey, Hal.
Hey, good morning, Doug. Good morning, Norma, once again. Okay, we've gone to Google Earth now to try to show you a little bit in an interactive way, a little bit about what happened. If you take a look here from the computer, right under Williamsville here, this is the airport where the plane was headed, where my mouse is. Now, the plane would have been going, or should have been going, from up here, the top right-hand side of your screen, down this way onto the runway. Now, Clarence Center is where the crash happened, and if we zoom in a little bit, we can actually go to, let's see if I can move this down here on the monitor. We can zoom on in to where that neighborhood was and is, and you can see by looking at these images that, yes, it is quite a populated area, not as densely populated as we had first reported. This is what the neighborhood looks like. You can see rows and rows of homes. And I'm going to bring Chuck Samuels in here. Chuck, can you just zoom in a little bit so that we can see a little bit closer in terms of where the house was? Because you can see there's a field on the left-hand side of the house over here towards the west. So unfortunately, the landing could have happened over here in this field. It didn't. It missed the field and went into one of the homes. But as we heard the emergency crews say earlier in a press conference, they were actually quite surprised, Doug and Norma, that the plane just hit one of the homes because there are several homes here in this area right near this field. This morning, just the tail of the plane is what's left in just one of these homes. So a lot of homes nearby. It obviously didn't make it into the airport according to the flight plan. It stopped here right in this neighborhood, right in Clarence Center. Doug and Norma.
All right, thanks, Hal. An indication of just how steep that descent was.
Yeah.
No indication from the conversations between the pilot, we're told it was a woman, and the control tower shortly before the plane disappeared from radar screens. There was no indication of anything going wrong. Also, no indication that this was a terrorist act. It appears to be simply a catastrophic breakdown in terms of either the mechanics of the plane hitting something, weather conditions. Again, NTSB investigators were due on the scene right around now. They were due to arrive in Buffalo at 6 o'clock this morning, and indeed, if they did, could be almost to the scene at this point.
The task of just retrieving the remains of that wreckage, that hasn't even started because they're still waiting for all of that, the flames to burn out. It's still a very hot scene, according to investigators. So we're going to have much more from Clarence Center. We've got crews on the scene, of course, and we'll have the very latest for you coming up in just a bit. Stay with us.
From your breaking news and weather authority, this is 13WHAM News Midday.
I was able to see the orange from the fire, and I ran and grabbed my son. I said, look out the window, something major happened.
Continental Flight 3407 crashes into a home in Clarence Center, New York last night. 50 people are killed. Good afternoon. We begin with a breaking news alert this midday. I'm Norma Holland. Everyone on board a Continental Airlines flight was killed in a crash late last night. It happened in Clarence Center near Buffalo around 10:30 last night. The plane was on its way to Buffalo from Newark, New Jersey. It appears 44 passengers, 4 crew members, and 1 off-duty pilot were on board that plane. A man in the home in which the plane crashed was also killed. 2 other people in the home made it out alive. We're going to hear more about their amazing stories coming up in just a few minutes. But first, a National Transportation Safety Board official saying this midday that the plane's voice and cockpit data recorders have been recovered from the wreckage and are being taken to Washington, D.C. for analysis. This is from CNN, but we're going to turn right now to 13WHAM's Sean Carroll, live in Clarence Center with the very latest on the investigation and what witnesses are saying that they saw and heard when that plane crashed.
Yeah, Norma, first a few things to bring you up to speed. We have calls into the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, that is handling this investigation right now to independently confirm those reports that they have recovered the black box, the data recorder, the cockpit recorder. That, as we were told in a briefing just a few hours ago, was their first priority when taking over their role as lead investigators in this case. Then those devices will be taken to Washington, D.C. for immediate analysis. That is their procedure as they continue to investigate here on the ground. Also bringing you up to speed, we have a crew, Evan Dawson, not a little ways from here in Cheektowaga, where the Governor David Patterson is set to begin a press conference briefing us on his feelings, emotions, and perhaps even some more information about this crash. Now, they're looking for witnesses, investigators they are. They are looking for witnesses, neighbors, people that heard things, saw things, because all of that goes into piecing together exactly what happened around 10:30 last night when Flight 3407 hit the ground here in Clarence Center. We spoke with one gentleman. He has perhaps one of the most accurate accounts. He was right there, driving in his car, among the first to call 911 when this plane went down. Here's how he describes what he saw.
From what I could see and remember that I'm looking out my windshield, I'm having, because it's close enough, I'm having to look underneath at my rearview mirror, and I watched this plane go down, and from my vantage point, it's tipped nose down, tilted a little left, and heading on a bad trajectory.
It's a tale that we have heard from some other witnesses, his much more detailed, describing this plane perhaps almost nosediving out of the sky directly on to that one home. He tells me he's telling his story to as many as possible, to investigators as well. He says it's consistent, it's what he saw. He thinks it could help this investigation. We're hearing so many other stories up here from other witnesses, neighbors, other accounts. One woman we spoke to, her son was actually the first to rush out, take some video of the scene, rush back to his home just a couple blocks away from this crash scene, and post that video on YouTube. She describes that with some emotion afterwards.
And he ran toward that direction and took some video footage and put it up on YouTube, and it must have gotten picked up from some of the major stations, and he was on the phone all night long. People called from as far away as Russia, trying to interview him and talk to him about the footage. And my thoughts coming here now, I'm just so saddened because it's like, it makes it real. I mean, I saw it last night from a distance. I didn't go up close. And then I watched his video footage online, and it's just disheartening.
You can see there in just 30 seconds her emotions, a little bit of excitement for her son, and then quickly the reality sets in. It's that sort of emotion that we've heard from so many witnesses and neighbors throughout the early morning hours all the way up until this noon hour. We spoke with one man a little bit earlier, and he said, I feel kind of numb because it's hard to believe that some 50 people have lost their lives this way in such an instant. And obviously that's what so many are feeling and thinking this midday hour. Norma.
Yeah, and of course we're still trying to figure out exactly why this all happened. All sorts of, guesses as to whether it was the weather or, but apparently no distress call from the plane that we know of, or at least that were recorded. Nothing from the pilot, the 2 pilots on that plane.
Yeah, we have heard some recordings from the tower trying to communicate with the plane in the air. It was only 5 minutes from landing. No word from the plane back to the tower. Some have speculated weather. Some have speculated perhaps ice on wings or in engine parts. All of that under investigation. The NTSB literally not commenting, not speculating at this hour. They have procedures. They're following it. We're expecting a briefing a little later this afternoon.
All right, we'll let you get back to do your work there. We appreciate you bringing us up to date. And of course, I know you're independently trying to confirm CNN's report that those 2 black boxes were indeed recovered. We'll let you get back to work there. All right, Sean, thank you so much. And we are still learning the names of the passengers on board Flight 3407. The names of the crew, though, have been released by the airline. Captain Marvin Renslow, who you see there, was the pilot of the plane. He had flown more than 3,000 hours with Colgan Air, which operated Continental Flight 3407. First Officer and co-pilot Rebecca Shaw was with him. Flight Attendant Matilda Quintero, Flight Attendant Donna Prisco were both starting with the airline on the same day last year. Also on board, Captain Joseph Zeffoletto. He was an off-duty crew member aboard the flight last night. Those are the only names of the crew that we were able to confirm. Rather, the entire crew. We're still waiting to hear some more confirmation from the airline of the victims, the passengers on board that plane. Now, meteorologist Marty Snyder has been tracking how the weather at the time of this crash may have been a factor, and you heard Sean allude to that, whether it was ice or whether it was the wind. And Marty's live in our newsroom right now taking a look at how this may have played a part. And I know, Marty, this morning you kind of showed us that there was a wind pattern change.
Yes.
Now, that may, and we caution here, we don't know the cause, may have played a role.
Right. There are many different things, as we all know, that could have come into play. But the one thing as far as the weather goes is there were 2 different types of observations at the time of the crash from Niagara Falls and also from the Buffalo Airport. Niagara Falls was reporting rain. The Buffalo Airport down in Cheektowaga, they were reporting snow. So there was some type of a change there. Here's a little reference as to where we're looking at. If you've ever been down the thruway heading towards Buffalo, most likely it was that runway that is right by the thruway there that comes across just before the Buffalo toll barrier, which is just down the road a little bit there. That's the one that likely this plane was going to be landing on, and it was had made the turn to come in to line up for that runway. Here's another little reference. If you look way up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you can just barely read it. Clearance center up here, so it was just lined up with that runway, getting ready to come in. Now, the very interesting part of this is you take a look at this map. This is something different how we normally show things on the air. This is what you call radial velocities. This pretty much is just a snapshot of what the velocities of the winds were at that time, just shown in a color type way. And if you look very closely at this map, notice this one little line that drops down from, say, Albion down towards the Batavia area, even from up towards Lockport down towards Cheektowaga where the airport is. And that represents a little bit of a wind shift. It's a little change in the wind. North of that line, winds were generally out of the northwest. South of that line, winds were generally out of the southwest. Now, most likely what may have happened is that plane came in from Newark. It had to come up towards the airport and then make a little bit of a turn to come in at that southwesterly approach to the airport. It may have had to cross that wind shift line once going north, a second time coming back. That could have caused some issues with that change in the wind direction. Also, those different precipitation types from Buffalo to Niagara Falls. Something was going on there as far as those different temperatures aloft. So I think there are a lot of things that may come out over these next couple days as the NTSB gets out there and does some of the research.
Marty, for the first time this morning, I heard a word I'd never heard before, and I know you were familiar with it, something called rime ice. It is a form of ice that may have also played a role in this crash.
That is. It's almost like when you get frost, say, on your window at home. You have a surface that's slightly cooler. There's some moisture outside, and it can condense on there and then freeze on contact. Sometimes it can be fog that may freeze on contact. But generally, the plane is coming down from those slightly colder parts of the atmosphere down into the location where there may be a little bit of liquid moisture. And that moisture would just condense and freeze, possibly on the wings, the fuselage. So that's another thing that I'm sure they'll be looking into over upcoming days.
But again, all of this speculation until we finally know But Marty, thank you for bringing us and giving us kind of a scenario as to the weather conditions that evening. We appreciate it. Yeah. All right. As we said earlier at the beginning of our broadcast, 50 people were killed, 50 people in all, including a man on the ground. 2 people, though, inside the home that the plane crashed into managed to escape. One of them, we're told, is a student at the SUNY Brockport. And 13WHAM's Elizabeth Schubert is live in Brockport, and we're hearing more about one of the survivors in particular. Elizabeth?
That's right, Norma. We were able to confirm with a SUNY Brockport spokesperson that 22-year-old Jill Walensky is indeed a student at the university. She is a 22-year-old recreations and leisure studies major, a communications minor. Apparently, she was inside the house when the plane hit. As you just mentioned, she was able to escape. I think we have a picture of Jill. There she is. And we were able to also gain some information that 57-year-old Karen Lewinsky, also escaped. Both of them were said to be in stable condition at Millard Fillmore Suburban Hospital. They did tell officials, and this is according to Buffalo News, they did tell officials in the hospital that they were in the house when the plane hit. Now, there was one other resident in the house when the plane hit. That resident is said to have died. According to Buffalo News, they checked with some voting records, and they found the only male in that residence through Erie County voting records was 61-year-old Douglas Walensky. We do not know, though, from authorities if he was the one who was killed when the plane hit the house. Now, back to Jill Walensky. This SUNY Brockport spokesperson said a lot of people in her department having a really hard time with this situation, and they are trying at this point to get more information for us. Hopefully, we can help you out and let you know.
All right. We appreciate that. And we are learning, though, that we've got those 2 survivors that we talked about, Jill and her mother. Right. The father, we understand, we believe, was killed at this point. But we'll have more with you coming up later on, and we thank you for your briefing at this point. We understand, though, that they have released a partial victims list. We told you about the crew members who were killed in this crash. We've also learned a couple of other names. Former Amherst resident Beverly Eckert, the widow of Sean Rooney, who was killed on September 11th. She was headed to Buffalo last night to celebrate, or rather commemorate, what would have been his 58th birthday. We are learning more about some of these names and the heartbreaking stories behind them. So let's recap our top story this midday about the crash of Flight 3407. 50 people were killed when that Continental Airlines plane crashed into a home in Clarence Center, New York, that is near Buffalo. The flight was en route from Newark, New Jersey to the Buffalo airport. 2 survived that crash, a mother and her daughter, the plane crashing into their home. At this point, it is unclear what caused the plane to go down. 1 man was killed on the ground. Still ahead from midday, meteorologist Stacy Pengen will be back with a look at our Weather Authority forecast. And coming up soon, honors for 3 Rochester police officers for helping save a fellow officer's life. And of course, we'll have much more on our top story about that plane crash when we come back. Stay with us.
The crash of Flight 3407. The investigators are on the scene now. And we'll remember the talent of this Rochester native who died on that plane last night.
This is a 13WHAM News special. The crash of Flight 3407.
A plane falls out of the sky, just minutes away, just miles away from a safe landing, from the waiting family and friends. And we continue our coverage of breaking news. Good afternoon, I'm Doug Embledge.
And I'm Holly Maynard. Ginny Ryan is off today. 50 people died when that plane went down near Buffalo last night. 44 of the victims were passengers. 5 were members of the crew. 1 person who died was in the house that was hit by the plane. 2 others in that house, including a SUNY Brockport student, got out alive. The black box recorders have been recovered from the wreckage. They are said to be in good shape. They are in Washington now for analysis.
Continental Connection Flight 3407 left Newark Airport in New Jersey at about 9:20 last night. The twin-engine turboprop was a little over half full. It crashed in Erie County, in Clarence Center, just miles short of its destination, the Buffalo Airport.
There is so much to tell you. In a moment, what we've learned about who was on board, including a Rochester native who was flying to play in Buffalo with his old friend, Chuck Mangione.
But first, the people who lived near the crash scene, some who heard the plane crash, then came out to witness the horrible aftermath. 13WHAM's Sean Carroll has been in Clarence Center since the middle of the night and is now in Amherst, where he covered that press conference just a little while ago. Sean, you talked to a lot of people out there today, people who saw something that they will never forget.
There's no question about that, Doug. My photographer and I pulled into Clarence Center in the early hours this morning. Police and officials had already secured a 2-block radius around that crash scene, yet we could see this huge plume of smoke billowing from the crash scene over the hamlet into the town. And quickly, neighbors and eyewitnesses, their stories started to roll in. They rolled in right through daybreak as we learned more and more about the circumstances behind this tragedy. Of course, I could tell you what they saw, what they heard, what they felt, and what they smelled, but then again, I can't tell it half as good as they can.
Heard it sounded like a prop plane coming in, and it was kind of like sputtering, like it was gonna stall out or something like that, and it was real loud. It was just right down the street, like a quarter mile. And the next thing you know, we heard it crash, so we looked out the window and there's bright lights.
I thought a plow with its blade down had struck a transformer pole. That's kind of what it sounded like. And then I thought, no, that couldn't have been it. It must have been an earthquake.
But then I heard the crash, and that's when I looked down. I was able to see the orange from the fire, and I ran and grabbed my son. I said, look out the window, something major happened.
We were just amazed with such a large plane that hit such a small house, you know, and didn't hit anything else.
The flames were huge. I mean, 100 feet in the air, huge.
From what I could see, and remember that I'm looking out my windshield, I'm having, because it's close enough, I'm having to look underneath of my rearview mirror, and I watched this plane go down, and from my vantage point, it's tipped nose down, tilted a little left, and heading on a bad trajectory.
Usually everybody knows everybody and looks out for everyone, so it's going to be rough for this community for a long time.
And clearly, as we learn more and more about each and every victim, more and more communities, no doubt, will feel the ripple effects of this tragedy. Of course, of all the observations I heard today, one rang true with each and every person, and that was a sound that perhaps maybe lends itself to the cause of this crash. Each and every person described some sort of mechanical malfunction like sound. I can't describe it much better. Some described it as a clicking or perhaps as a prop plane in trouble coming down. Each and every person said the sound was not usual for a plane flying overhead, and planes fly over their heads often as they come into Buffalo, yes.
All right, Sean, stick with us through the hour and into 13WHAM News at 6, and we'll be back to you in just a little bit. Now to what we know about the crash. The NTSB arrived on the scene about 6 o'clock this morning, and they continue their investigation today.
The black box recorders are in Washington right now, and investigators say their recordings have yielded a significant amount of information about the plane's final moment. Evan Dawson has also been in the Buffalo area all day long getting the latest updates. He was at a press conference just within the last hour with the latest information. Evan.
Yeah, Holly, the black box recorders have revealed that the crew of Flight 3407 was concerned about a buildup of ice, not just on the windshield, which they were dealing with, but also on the leading edges of the plane. Now, we now know that the crew at least attempted to deploy the de-icing mechanism on the plane. We don't know if it worked, and it might not have. Airlines are equipped with a de-icing boot that essentially goes out to where the ice is causing problems, and it kicks or breaks the ice off the plane to solve this problem. Well, here is what happened in the final moments of the flight when ice was perhaps an issue and the crew was dealing with this problem. First, they did deploy the landing gear. The information from the black boxes indicates that they did do that. Then they deployed the flaps, another sign that just 6 miles away from the airport, they were attempting to land the plane despite the problems. But just seconds after the flaps were deployed, we know that the plane pitched and rolled wildly, which meant it turned up in the air and on its side. And so if ice was a problem, listen to what they say. It wasn't just about visibility.
A significant ice buildup is an aerodynamic impediment, if you will. Airplanes are built with wings that are shaped a certain way, and if you've got too much ice, the shape of the ice or the shape of the wing can change, requiring different airspeeds and so forth. So
we should make it clear that the NTSB is not labeling ice as the official cause of this crash. They're still investigating. All they wanted to do this afternoon was put out some facts about what they have found out from the black box recorders. But they spent roughly 3/4 of the press conference talking about the ice and answering questions about the ice. I did get a chance to ask how common it is for planes, especially in our part of the country this time of year, to need to de-ice. And they said, frankly, it is a very common maneuver, a very common procedure. And in fact, they don't need me to stress this. I think everybody realizes that flights are very, very safe statistically. This is something that they do all the time. They de-ice. It is almost never a problem. We're going to try to find out more throughout the weekend if that de-icing mechanism did not work.
Yeah, that would be important. All right, thanks so much, Evan, and we will check back with you as well. In fact, we're going to talk to Glenn Johnson in just a few minutes about something called rime ice, something I hadn't heard of till this happened this morning, and what it is and how it possibly, again, we're speculating here, how it possibly could have been a factor in this crash.
In those black box recorders, there was no sign of distress.
Which is good news for the investigators, or at least in terms of that they were able to tell that. They had very clear recordings.
In terms of what they heard from the voices of the pilot and the co-pilot.
Yeah, I didn't mean as good news, of course. The audio tapes of the control tower show how suddenly the pilot and co-pilot must have lost control of the plane. At one point, the air traffic controller is talking to the plane, then suddenly there is no answer.
Buffalo approach, Colgan 3407, 12 for 11,000 with Romeo.
Colgan 3407, approach. Colgan 3407, Buffalo. Colgan 3407, approach. Delta 1998, look off your right side about 5 miles for a dash 8. Should be 2300. Do you see anything there?
Negative, Delta 1998. We're just in the bottoms and nothing on the TCAS.
And let us some ground communication. You need to talk to somebody at least 5 miles northeast. Okay, possibly Clarence. That area right in there, Akron area. Either state police or sheriff's department need to find out if anything is on the ground. This aircraft was 5 miles out, and all of a sudden we have no response to that aircraft. All I can tell you is the aircraft over the marker, and we're not talking to them now.
So you can see there, they're asking other aircraft if there was any sign of that Continental flight, and there was not in that recording. There were 4 crew members who were working on board Flight 3407. Captain Marvin Dean Runslow had been with the airline for almost 3.5 years. He had more than 3,000 hours of flying experience with the carrier. First Officer Rebecca Shaw joined the airline last year. The flight attendants were Matilda Quintero and Donna Prisco, and there was also an off-duty crew member on board. He was Captain Joseph Zufiletto, who was from Jamestown.
Rochester lost a native son on that plane, and the world lost his music. Jerry Nywood was on his way to Buffalo to play a concert tonight with his old friend, Chuck Mangione, also Rochester's own. 13WHAM's Jane Flash has been talking to people this afternoon who cannot believe he is gone.
And a lot of people are reacting to this, shocked and saddened. Jerry Nywood grew up in Rochester and graduated from the Eastman School of Music in 1970. He's well known on the Rochester music scene for his involvement with Chuck Mangione. The two were to play together in Buffalo tonight. That is why he was on that flight. Now take a minute and listen to what has been lost. Now you're looking at video from the Friends and Love reunion concert in Rochester last May. Jerry Nywood joined Chuck Mangione, Bat McGrath, and Don Potter to play the songs they did 30 years before. Word of today's news has spread throughout the music community, and people are shocked and saddened.
It makes you think when you get up
that you have to make the day count, and you have to make, when you're making music, you have to make the music count. And the incredible beauty that you heard in his playing was there because of the beauty that was in his soul and his spirit. That's who Jerry Nywood was.
Now, also on that plane, Chuck Mangione's young guitarist, Coleman Mellett. He also performed here in Rochester last May, as you see there. Again, the two musicians were on Flight 3407 to reunite with Chuck Mangione and play with the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra tonight. Chuck Mangione did release a statement today. I'm in shock over the horrible, heartbreaking tragedy of the crash of Flight 3407, which took the lives of my dear friends and band members. I am grieving and praying with their family members. Tonight's show, Doug, as you probably might guess, has been canceled.
I got to tell you, I met Jerry Nywood the first time in my high school at Rush Henrietta. He came in and was often in local high schools, coming home back to Rochester to play for kids and to talk with kids and to meet young musicians. And then the last time I saw him was at the Friends in Love reunion concert in May of '07.
It's interesting because Jeff Tyzik brought that up, and that's how he first became acquainted with Jerry. And he talks about the profound impact he has had on so many young musicians, including himself, and we'll hear more about that tonight.
I'm going to ask people to get out, if they have it, their Chuck Mangione album, if they have the Friends in Love concert, listen to a song Don Potter sang called She's Gone, and the sax solo on that song, and I got people in the studio who know it, and it was just, it will make you cry, and even more so tonight. Thanks,
Quite a
Jane.
talent.
Yeah, he sure was.
A full list of the crash victims has not been released, but some others are being identified. One is Beverly Eckert. Her husband died in the World Trade Center on 9/11, and she became an activist for victims' families. Also killed, Alison DeForge, one of the world's leading experts on genocide in Rwanda. For updates, we will keep a list online at 13wham.com. Of course, they are not releasing the names until they are sure that the family members have been notified or the family members have been the ones releasing the names.
President Obama took a moment today to pay tribute to those who were lost in the crash of Flight 3407.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the families and friends who lost loved ones. And as always, our thanks go out to the brave first responders who arrived immediately to try and save lives and who are still on the scene, keeping people safe. Tragic events such as these remind us of the fragility of life and the value of every single day.
President Obama met just a few weeks ago with one of the victims we've mentioned already, Beverly Eckert, and he did that just weeks ago. Coming up in our next half hour, we're going to hear why the president says she inspired him.
In this crash, there was also a story of survivors. They were watching TV when the roof fell in. That is how 57-year-old Karen Walensky described the impact when the commuter plane crashed through the roof of her Clarence Center home. She and her 22-year-old daughter Jill, who's there in the middle of that photograph, crawled through the debris and were able to escape. One man in the house died, but it has not been confirmed that it was 61-year-old Douglas Walensky, who was in another part of the home at the time.
His daughter, Jill Walensky, is a senior at SUNY Brockport, scheduled to graduate in May, and as 13 Wham's Elizabeth Schubert found out, she has made quite an impact in her time there.
A plane crashed in Clarence Center, hitting SUNY Brockport student Jill Walensky's home. It was a scary moment for her classmates.
And everybody just started freaking out because everybody really cares about Jill. Even if you don't know her, it's just you're a student here. And how could that happen to anyone?
SUNY Brockport Junior Megan Bell has worked closely with Walensky during the last several years. They share the same major. Jill spends a lot of her time here at Hartwell Hall. That's where the Recreation and Leisure Studies Department is located. We talked to some of her classmates. They say she's a great student.
I think she cared about her work and she cared about people in the classes.
She's very friendly. A lot of the students enjoy working with her. She brings a lot of energy to a group, a lot of new ideas.
For Student Government President Kyle Amendola, the crash hit close to home, and not just because he's friends with Walensky.
Last night, I did not know it was her house. I do live a couple miles away, so it's fairly close to where I live at home, so I was wondering if I knew who it was.
And he's thankful she and her mother made it out.
It was unbelievable. I don't know what to think when I found out that she survived.
Kyle Amendola and Megan Bell are working with several other groups to show support for the Walensky family. Walensky is a student manager at Brockway, that's the student dining hall, and also works at the Rec Club. Tonight, students are setting up a donation table at Brockport's hockey and basketball games. There will also be donation tables in the student union, and the student government is also trying to set up a candlelight vigil later in the week.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. So important to point out, we told you about Jill with the Rochester connection being from SUNY Brockport. We talked about Jerry, and there's a good chance that more of the victims also have connections to Rochester. And as we get their names, we will continue to pass them along to you. Here's some more information on the type of plane that crashed. It was an Q400 Bombardier aircraft operated by Colgan Air. It had 74 seats, and it was a relatively new plane. Its first flight was just last year. Officials say it had a clean safety record.
We want to turn again to some of the factors that investigators are going to be considering in the cause of this crash. One of them is the presence of something called rime ice. It was, according to other pilots, in the air last night. 13WHAM's meteorologist Glenn Johnson is here to explain just what it is. My rudimentary understanding is it's kind of an icy fog.
Yeah, to a certain degree, and it's the accumulation that's the key thing. We've seen ice accumulate. Usually it's that clear glaze that we know all too well. This is the kind of ice that's more cloudy, more opaque. There's a lot of air mixing in on there, and it's interesting the way it develops. First, we're talking about water droplets, so let me show you a graphic here that the water droplets are liquid, but it's in an air atmosphere that the temperature is actually down below freezing. Now, they'll stay liquid until the plane flies into it. And once it flies into those liquid droplets, they freeze instantaneously. The drops freeze right on the wings, right on the airplane, and then it creates a very rough airflow, a coating on the wings, and it disrupts that airflow. This is something the aviation community has been battling for many years. And we know just when you're in a plane on the ground and they're de-icing the plane left and right, it's a problem on the ground. And obviously the most severe side of this is when it's taking off and when it's landing. And we think right around 6,000 to 10,000 feet, that's the way the atmosphere was last night. They were getting some of this freezing rain. It was accumulating on the wings. We don't know for sure, obviously, but it's something that they're going to take a very close look at.
Before we add to your fear of flying, as was explained today, the planes are equipped with a way to break up that ice. Millions of people fly every year. Millions of them go through an icing situation, and nothing bad happens. So the question now is, what was the perfect storm last night if indeed ice was a factor that brought that plane down? Yeah, it's going to be a big question. I know they take care of that ice differently. On the jet planes, they actually use heaters. They're more efficient. This is more of a pneumatic kind of way that they remove the ice on the wings. They break it up. Not quite as effective, and from what I've understood anyway. So. All right, and we're going to talk more about this later on with Bill Lau formerly of Wham Radio.
A pilot himself.
And an aviation expert for sure, and we're going to do that later in this half hour.
But for now, we take a moment now to recap our top story. The crash of Flight 3407. 50 people were killed when the Continental Airlines plane crashed into a home last night in Clarence Center, New York, near Buffalo. The plane was just minutes away from landing when it went down in light snow and fog, just 6 miles short of the airport.
2 black boxes have been recovered, and as we've discussed, there is some speculation that ice buildup on the wings may have played a role in the crash. The audio and data on those black boxes said to be in good shape. We've devoted a special section of 13WHAM.com to the crash of Flight 3407, from the first reports, the witness accounts, the audio from the traffic control, and raw video and pictures from the scene. It's all on 13WHAM.com this afternoon.
Now, coming up, Chief Meteorologist Glenn Johnson will be back with a look at our Weather Authority forecast for this weekend.
And our coverage of the crash of Flight 3407 will continue.
This is a 13WHAM News special. The crash of Flight 3407.
Plans for a happy reunion. Plans never realized when a plane never made it to the airport.
I was with my 4-year-old son, who was there to see his Aunt Ellie. And at 11:30, my brother called me to let me know that a plane had crashed.
Good evening, everyone. The plane suddenly fell out of the sky, ending 50 lives in an instant.
Yeah, Continental Flight 3407 crashed shortly before 10:30 last night, about 24 hours ago. The flight was en route to Buffalo from Newark, New Jersey. 44 of the victims were passengers. 5 were members of the crew. 1 person who died was in the house that was hit by the plane. 2 others in that house were able to get out.
I think the first thing I said to myself was, is this real? Is this reality? Or I didn't think I was going to get out of there.
Walensky's daughter, Jill, is a senior at SUNY Brockport. We will hear from her friends in just a few minutes.
The black box recorders have been recovered from the wreckage and are in Washington, where they will be analyzed. The NTSB says the crew noticed a buildup of ice on the wings and windshield as the plane approached the airport. The plane then went through a severe pitch and roll after positioning its flaps for a landing. It crashed about 6 miles short of the airport. It was the nation's first deadly crash of a commercial airliner in 2.5 years.
Well, while the shock remains in Clarence Center, now the tough job begins, finding the victims. 13 WHAM's Patrice Walsh live now in Clarence Center. I imagine a very emotional day. We've talked to so many people connected to those on the plane, but for those in this neighborhood, it must be devastating as well.
Don, it really has hit home here. We are just down the road from that crash scene. The fire department is there putting out any hot spots. They're trying to search for remains. We understand that some, in fact, have been found. And, this is a very tight community. Many people here telling us this has brought them even closer together. Sarah and Adam Reifensberg are used to seeing planes fly over their home in Clarence Center, but this one was loud and low. They knew there was trouble.
Yeah, just like a plane falling from the sky and hitting your house.
You just start to think, the chances of it just landing a mile away. We could see it from our upstairs bedroom window. We could just see the trees were all lit up, the smoke coming from, it was pretty scary.
Within minutes, they saw a large orange glow outside their bedroom window. Adam says the terrifying thing is this could have been anyone's house and anyone's family on board.
It's horrible. It is absolutely horrible. And you start to feel, what if it had, if the plane had hit our house.
Police are blocking off the crash site, which is about a half a mile from where we are standing. It's now become a recovery site as searchers look for bodies of those on board. The National Transportation Safety Board says the recovery of remains will be a slow and deliberate process out of respect for the families. They don't know the cause of the crash yet, but they say ice was definitely a factor.
A significant ice buildup is an aerodynamic impediment, if you will. Airplanes are built with wings that are shaped a certain way, and if you've got too much ice, the shape of the ice or the shape of the wing can change, requiring different airspeeds and so forth. So,
Tim McGinnis was at the crash scene Thursday night and returned Friday night because he still couldn't believe what happened.
Horrific, devastating. I sat there and actually prayed for probably an hour just, for the poor people that perished.
And we've heard so many similar stories from families here, from neighbors who live nearby, everybody realizing that could have been their house and their family members on that plane. The National Transportation Safety Board meeting with family members at about 6 o'clock tonight to update them on the investigation and again the search for those remains. They have in fact found some remains. We are told that everything though will be kept at the crash scene and secure, and they've asked for dental and DNA records, Don, to help them find out who these victims are. Of course, everything being done very respectfully for these families who've already have way too much to deal with right now.
It's so devastating when you have such a fiery crash. Obviously, the one house and those right next to it affected. I would imagine a good portion of the neighborhood, people are being asked to not go home until they can get all of this intact and, again, clear that ground.
They are letting people that live right nearby into their homes, Don, but it's very carefully. The police are out there. You cannot get in there unless you have a reason to be there. It is a secured scene at this point. We're told, though, that just that one house, of course, impacted by this. But again, they're trying to keep people away because this is a tough job now, trying to find those remains.
All right, Patrice Walsh, thank you and all of our reporters who are on the scene out there throughout the day. Again, Sean Carroll and Evan Dawson as well throughout the day reporting from the scene. Thank you, Edward.
Well, as we mentioned a little earlier, a SUNY Brockport student escaped from the house after the plane hit. One of her professors says 22-year-old Jill Walensky stayed home in Clarence after winter break, waiting for an internship to start in March. Classmates tell us Walensky is very involved at Brockport. She works as a student manager in the dining hall at the rec center and tackles student issues in her major, recreation and leisure studies. Student government president Kyle Amendola is close friends with Walensky.
I did not know it was her house. I do live a couple miles away, so it's fairly close to where I live at home. So I was wondering if I knew who it was. It was unbelievable. I don't know what to think when I found out that she survived.
And Jill's father, Doug, was in another part of the house. As of tonight, authorities have still not confirmed that he is the person who was killed.
And now more about the victims. 4 crew members were working on board Flight 3407. Captain Marvin Dean Renslow had been with the airline for almost 3.5 years. First Officer Rebecca Shaw joined the airline last year. The flight attendants were Matilda Quintero and Donna Prisco, and off-duty crew member Joseph Zufaletto from Jamestown, who was headed to visit his grandmother.
Loved flying. It was his life. It was a way for him to die. He's happy that way.
I've had the privilege of flying with her, and she was an amazing pilot. Absolutely amazing. We couldn't be prouder of her as a family.
Although we are still learning the names of the passengers on board, the identities of some of the victims have been provided by relatives and friends, and you will find those at 13WHAM.com. And a loss for the music community in Rochester and around the world. Now, if you listen to that music all night, musician Jerry Nywood was on his way to Buffalo to play a concert tonight with his old friend Chuck Mangione. Nywood is a graduate of both Franklin High and the Eastman School of Music. Word of today's news has spread throughout the music community. People are shocked and saddened.
I used to go listen to the Chuck Mangione Quartet with Jerry Nywood playing at the Shakespeare Lounge, and he was a major influence. It's incredibly shocking.
And also on that plane, Chuck Mangione's young guitarist, Coleman Mellett. Mangione said today, quote, "I am in shock over the horrible, heartbreaking tragedy of the crash of Flight 3407, which took the lives of my dear friends and band members. I am grieving and praying with their family members." A little bit later on for our T-shirt segment, we're going to share some of the music of Jerry Nywood.
Well, as we've seen today, the scope of this tragedy reaches far beyond Buffalo. People from co-pilot Rebecca Shaw's home state of Washington to Rochester to Washington, D.C. have been touched by it.
The terror, the pain on that plane, and the incredible pain and anguish with the families afterwards. It is heartbreaking. It is so tragic. Again, we hope and pray for the comfort of those families during the worst of times.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the families and friends who lost loved ones. And as always, our thanks go out to the brave first responders who arrived immediately to try and save lives and who are still on the scene, keeping people safe. Tragic events such as these remind us of the fragility of life and the value of every single day.
And the president also met with victim Beverly Eckert just weeks ago. A prayer service was held tonight at a church in Clarence. The pastor told the crowd they are entering a, quote, season of grieving. The church lost one of its own parishioners in the crash. You can read more about the service in tomorrow morning's Democrat and Chronicle.
And just to bring all of this together for you now, 50 people were killed when a Continental Airlines plane crashed into a home last night in Clarence Center, New York. That is near Buffalo. The plane was heading for a landing when it went down in light snow and fog about 5 miles short of the runway. 2 black boxes have been recovered, and data revealing the crew discussed significant ice buildup on the wings before that crash. 13WHAM News, of course, will keep you continuously updated on this, not only on the weekend news that will be here as long as with Rachel Barnhart, but on 13WHAM.com as well. Chuck Wade is here. Time to take a first look at sports.
Yeah, Don, the crash of Flight 3407 struck a real chord with many Buffalo Sabres players and coaches, many of whom live in Clarence, some even less than a mile from where the crash happened. That crash on everybody's mind tonight as Buffalo took on San Jose tonight at HSBC Arena. A very long moment of silence before the game in Buffalo. There was plenty of noise when the game got started. Sabres down 1 with 10 seconds left. Craig Rivet ties the game on the slap shot. Tied at 5. They went to a shootout. 5th round of the shootout. It was still tied. Derek Roy off the crossbar. And the Sabres win it tonight. And as small a thing as it was, something for people in Buffalo to smile about tonight.
It was a happy ending. You know, it was what we needed. We needed that. We needed a fairy tale ending, and I thought we got a little bit of that. Before long, every fan in that stand is going to be touched by somebody, a friend, a neighbor, a brother, sister, mother, father, you name it.
Ruff this morning even got choked up during his morning skate press conference in Buffalo. You can see how much it affected all those guys tonight.
And that's the one thing the one thing that hasn't really come out yet is the whole list of people on board. And he said, as people hear that over the weekend and the days ahead, they're going to know someone who knew someone, who worked with someone, who lived down the street.
And right now you deal with the waiting for that. Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yep. When breaking news happens, turn to 13 Wham News.
We are covering breaking news on CW16 and on 13 Wham TV this morning. The crash of a Continental Airlines flight near Buffalo last night.
With extended live coverage on air.
Evan Johnson is standing by live now. He's been covering this all morning long.
Well, we had a chance to talk to some of the neighbors who...
Instant updates on 13wham.com. For continuing breaking news, turn to 13 Wham News, your breaking news and weather authority.